Whether you're a candidate or an employer, I think we all know how difficult it is to find, attract, and retain top talent. And it's the same thing with candidates. It's hard to find that perfect role, that employer that's going to invest in you.
Hey, this is Bryant Walker with the Creative Business Forum. I am joined today by Corrine Ishio, founder at My Working Soul and host of the Higher Intelligence podcast. So, Corrine, I'd love to learn a bit more about you and My Working Soul. Let's pass it to you.
Thank you, Brian. It is such an honor to be here. My working soul is solving the problem of opportunity connection in 2024 in the digital age. Whether you're a candidate or an employer, I think we all know how difficult it is to find, attract, and retain top talent. And it's the same thing with candidates. It's hard to find that perfect role, that employer that's going to invest in you. So that's the problem we're solving. And our solution is through our human purpose assessment. It's designed to help both organizations and individuals discover their purpose. And we help people through career solutions, coaching solutions, mentor solutions. It's designed to be a full embodied cycle to show someone the path forward to uncover their greatest potential.
I love that. That is so gosh darn concise. You've done this before, it sounds like.
A few times.
Hiring is hard enough. Hiring the right talent and structuring your company in a way that is both manageable and set to scale, as businesses do, is just its own school of thought, right? What is some discovery work that you do when you go into a new business or an organization to figure out what's what and where is the room for improvement?
That's a great question, Brian. I'll start off by saying one of the differentiators with working with my working soul as a partner is we treat every client completely uniquely. So we believe in building that customized approach to meet people where they are. With that said, there are some hallmarks of what we do that are best practices, so to speak. And one of them is asking really discerning questions. And that takes preparation up front of knowing the culture of an organization, the marketplace, what situations and issues that the team is actually dealing with. A close second to that, if not, number one, though, to uncover things like culture. There's no substitute for meeting with people in person, face to face,
Yeah.
actually being with a team. It's become so important to really show up in person for a myriad of reasons. There's all the interaction nuances of making sure you're really there with your client. But it's also the dedication of saying, I'm going to be there when it's hard, when it's easy, when it's rough. And it's that type of in-person personal connection that can't be replaced.
Yes. I love that you're saying that for a number of reasons. Key among them is we just are in the process of moving in to the new TAVO office, and I'm excited on
Yay.
that. But it is a bit of a bet because the world is so used to being virtual. But I think especially in businesses that are highly collaborative, which is, let's face it, most businesses should be more collaborative. I think we've gotten used to just getting by, checking the boxes and moving forward. But there's so much we're missing on just the day to day that, quite frankly, pre COVID, I think we took for granted. And now I feel like as a society, as a people, as professionals, we're craving it. But I also feel like we don't know how to do it anymore, if that makes any sense. Coming back into the real world is like, scary, and understandably so. It's just different. So, how are you guys coming in as the strategic wrecking ball, we'll say, to come in and help affect change positively and kind of get people out of their comfort zones and get back into the office and build a culture of collaboration?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I resonate with every single theme you brought up, Brian. And I would say it's content. This is the interesting response there.
Mhm.
Content and engagement. And I'm actually working with UCSD, their alumni association, to speak on using AI in one's career and job search. So the topic has been heavy on my heart, so to speak, about the differential ways in which people interact with one another, especially from a generational perspective. The reason why I said content and engagement is because, on a rudimentary level, so simplifying it to its basic foundation, people love to be reminded of the connections that they make and the closeness that they get. So even when you're just with your friend and you go out to lunch, when you take a picture of that interaction, it becomes a touchstone. so that we all remember how great that time was. It reminds people that it's wonderful to interact with other people. In a social media world, it becomes a deliverable in a sense to have that piece of content. It
Mhm.
now is an embodied, tangible memory. And you can only get there when you're truly engaging and seeking to make a real connection with someone.
Well put.
Thank you.
Well, and so we're talking about personal connections. We're also talking about the professional connections, and I feel like having worked in both corporate America and the agency side, there's those water cooler moments, the non-formal meetups and connections and commiserating, on how something went, good or bad, and those moments are fleeting, right? And even those little interactions, right? Are you coming up against some organizations that you're working with that are against the in-person piece, whether it's at the corporate executive level or at the staff level or everything in between?
Brian, that is so insightful. And I'm tempted to go on a tangent about how we met and how it was a bit of a water cooler moment, but
Yeah,
I'll table
yeah.
that for a moment. It was an interesting angle in which you phrased that. And I think overall, organizations are pivoting right now because there's so many teams that are struggling with, are we going to bring people back on site? Are we in the middle of that type of transition? Are we forcing it?
Mhm.
So what I have noticed is that there are different strategies that organizations are employing to, I'll say an interesting word choice here, toe that line.
Uh-huh.
And I think that some are going to be more successful than others. Ultimately, though, communication is so key to making that transition, whatever it's going to be. And that's where my working soul really enjoys making an impact. And I'd love to ask you, Brian, in your experiences as a founder, someone who has built a business from the ground up, what is your perspective on on-site work?
That's a great question, and thanks for having me on your podcast. I think, for me, we're pushing towards hybrid. I would love, after making this investment in this office, which is still coming together. We just had the conference table built just before this call started. Um, Hybrid makes sense to me, and the odd thing to me, just I've been in my profession for, we'll just say, a while, certainly pre-COVID. The idea of having just Fridays off, oh my God, that'd be amazing. I worked for people at agencies that I really liked working at, but I remember there was just a significant distrust of anyone that was, quote unquote, working from home for a couple hours. And in many cases, it was for, people that had kids and they needed to watch their kid for a couple hours. And the managing director or CEO at the time would just have this like no secret distrust for anyone working from home for any reason. Just like, oh, they're probably surfing or out to lunch. If they're not here, they're not working. And that's just not true. It wasn't true then, and it's definitely not true now. Now, are there limits to that? Yes. But for me, I'm trying to build this in a way, what would be the type of business that I would want to work for? Um, Relatively cool office, check. And cool area, check. But it's also the culture we're trying to build. We're interviewing, we're hiring a lot of people right now, and the question that everyone asks is, "What's your culture like?" And honestly, my answer is, I don't know yet. We're building it, but we are trying to build a culture that is intentionally culture forward. And what I mean by that is, I want those that are coming onto the team to be a part of that culture as we're building it. I don't want them coming in assuming that this is the way things are and this is the way things will always be. And what we're doing is Tuesday, Wednesdays, and a flex day, Thursday, Friday. So essentially 3 days in, 2 days out. And there will be some people that come in that are going to be in here 4 or 5 days a week. That's just the nature of it. We have some business development reps coming online in the next 1 or 2 months. They're probably going to be in here 3 to 5 days a week. And when they're not here, they're at a conference or a convention, growing the brand and the business. But for everyone else, I want them to come here and be recharged. Everyone's worked at a company where they had to be there 9 to 5 or 8 to 6, and the CEO's here. I better look like I'm working, right? And this is turning into like a much bigger soapbox speech, but I used to hate that, and it was so creatively draining that for me, I'm kind of overcorrecting on the other side of the pendulum swing, which is like, look, I want you here. I want you here and doing good work while you're here, and that doesn't happen by accident, and it certainly doesn't happen by being here 40, 50, 60 hours a week. That's nuts. I want people to have, the whole work-life balance, sure, but like live your life. work should be part of your life. For what we do when you're in a creative space, especially working for what is essentially a startup, I want people to come here and feel like they're making an impact, not just in their resume and their portfolio, but like there's something fulfilling about being here. And I think in a broader picture, business owners and operators need to be thinking that way. I'm taking people from their lives and their families. That sounds awful, but you know what I mean? Like I'm asking people to come here, help me build my thing, but I want it to be our thing. I want this to be something that people feel like they have a contributing voice and impact for. And that doesn't happen by accident. That comes from intention. Back to the idea of intentional culture. That's what I mean by that. 8
Absolutely.
minutes later, here we are.
I was dialed in, and
Okay.
that was a hotbed of great topics that I'd love to touch on. I mean, first and foremost, I see us, Brian. I know there's differences in some of what we do, but we're in the same business in terms of telling stories and
Mhm.
conveying messages with purpose. And it's interesting because this is going to seem like a kind of far reaching example here. But when I think about great storytellers, like, say, Saturday Night Live, going back to its origins, the writer's room,
Uh-huh.
everyone was in one room together. And the type of magic, there's no other word for it, the type of magic that occurs when you have multiple creatives, strategic thinkers in one room,
Yeah,
the
I love
types of
that.
dynamics that flow. I mean, there's just no replacement for it. So, from the cultural standpoint, too, love to see people face to face, and it becomes, I love that you said hours. Part of the joke with my working soul for a long time was that it was just me, it was just my working soul.
Yeah, yeah.
And we've now started to call it our working soul. Domain name isn't changing anytime soon, but it's a part of creating an inclusive community. I love that.
That's really neat. The visual of the writer's room and the round table, the table reads. Like I love watching those videos when they show up in my feed, and I'm captivated by it simply because of the magic you're talking about. And it's that back and forth, the riffing, and then like, you know what, that sounded better in my head. Let me scratch that out and write it down a different way and say it a different way, different cadence, different timbre, whatever. And it's like at what pace does the joke hit best? At what pace does this tagline work? And like we do that with advertising, and yet we try to force that through Zoom, and it just doesn't work the same. It really doesn't. And you need those whiteboard, water cooler, walk around the water. There's a little lake out front of the office it's more of a pond, but we now call it Lake TAVO.
Ooh.
So I really like that. And it's like it's getting out and collaborating and just being in that same space, breathing the same air, COVID. Um, that statement had a different meaning, in 2019. It didn't freak people out.
Mhm.
Now you say breathe the same air, and people go, no, you can't have that.
Yeah,
Um,
and,
yeah.
to play devil's advocate a bit, because I
Mhm.
know how we both feel, I'm sure that there might be some people that exist that perform better, isolated or by themselves. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's those people. But if you're in the business of, speaking and telling stories to audiences, usually it's a team sport. So,
Absolutely. We've been interviewing for new creative directors and art directors as we're growing the agency. And to my disappointment, while I respect it, I've come across a handful of individuals that are a certain place in their career and feel very firmly that they don't have to come into the office. And that might very well be the case for them. But the challenge there is I'm also trying to build a junior team and foster talent and grow talent. And they then miss out on that opportunity to truly collaborate. And so there is that bit of a rift. And obviously, there's plenty of candidates out there, which is exciting and daunting all in the same breath. But hopefully the right candidates will come through and we can find that right mix. And it does depend on, who you are as an organization and what is the culture you're trying to build, right? It all comes back to that. And if you're trying to build a culture of in-person collaboration, you can't really have it both ways. You're either all in or you're not. And for me, all in is hybrid, which is, contradictory to what I think corporate America is trying to do. And there's a lot of bigger agencies that are making headlines and going, we're all in office. You're either in 5 days a week or you're not working for us anymore. I don't want to be in that position. I don't want to scare talent away. I want this to be a welcoming environment. But again, coming from experience, this business works best with collaboration. And I think good work happens collaboratively. It doesn't happen in a silo. So it's challenging though, because there are those, again, I'm fine playing devil's advocate too. There are plenty of individuals that they don't see the issue, and I get that. And I've been doing this long enough. I can do 40 hours worth of work and it'll show. You'll see the work that I did, you'll see the product that I produced, and it'll be good. Would it be better if I collaborated with other people? Maybe. I don't know. But I could also get by just fine doing it in a silo. But I just, again, it goes back to intent. I don't want it to be the Bryant TAVO show. I want this to be something that other people feel like they have a stake in. So I don't know. That was getting off on another diatribe there. But what are your
Not at
thoughts?
all.
Coming across some of your brands that you're working with, organizations you're working with, are you finding there are some key folks, some key leadership or key talent that is refusing to go in the office, and you got to find a way to meet in the middle to bridge the gap?
I did not find that to be a diatribe at all. On the contrary, I found it super relevant, Brian. And I will say, I think I'm going to take a position of neutrality because ultimately it is going to come down to the nature of the business and the company and the culture, as you mentioned, that each organization wants to foster.
Mm-hmm.
It comes down to aligning motivations. And the really interesting thing about aligning motivations on the part of a candidate and the employer is so often, no offense to either party, but sometimes there's a little lack of self-awareness on both sides. And that's where human purpose assessment comes in for employers and leadership teams, as well as for talent, to really say, okay, like what are the outcomes that you want in your life? And to speak from the candidate side for that person who wants to stay at home and not interact with anyone. Okay, I'm not going to judge you, but let me just ask you directly, candidate that doesn't want to interact. What's your purpose? Do you care about your career? Do you work with people? Do you interact with people? Is the end user of whatever you're creating, the work that you're producing, is that person a human? What do you want in your life? Do you want to make a certain amount of money? Do you want to lead a team? Do you really think you can do all of that remote? Usually, when you ask people those fact-finding, probing questions, they start to uncover for themselves, you know what? Why am I limiting myself by having a blanket statement about what I will do or won't do?
Yeah.
Maybe I want to expand my thinking a little bit. So for me, it's about uncovering purpose.
I love that. I want to pull back more of these layers, but I think we might want to compartmentalize that for a follow-up episode. I'd love to get into the tactics specifically, and I think that might be a separate conversation where we can get into almost like a step-by-step process.
Love that. Absolutely. And so to speak tactically, let's talk about the fact-finding questions,
Yeah.
because that's a process too. And alongside those fact-finding questions, and they're going to be different depending on the organization and the individual and the context, there's also active listening and silence, um, which can sometimes be hard, especially for dynamic leadership teams that are really good at pushing out a message. And it's
Yeah.
your role as a leader to inspire people. So often we do that by communicating. But there's other personality types in the world and communication styles where maybe drawing out that interaction takes a lot more listening and being silent,
Hmm.
and facilitating those conversations safely usually means bringing in someone like my working soul, a mediator that is neutral, so that you really get that truthful answer. Because too often, and I'll speak more on the employee side now, too often people are trained into thinking that they need to show up as a different person at work, and they're not capable, honestly, or practiced at that point in their career to actually advocate and have a voice for themselves. And speaking as a millennial myself, for my generation, as well as latter generations after me, I think with so much technology, it becomes very loud and the
Yeah.
human voice can get lost. And we have lost the art of training in schools, that art of conversation, and more importantly, having a voice and advocating for yourself, speaking up.
Oh man, that is a giant can of worms. It really is, but an amazing can of worms. That, gosh, we again, you and I can make this a 3-hour episode, but I
We
can't do
could.
that. I know. Gosh. Okay, so let's do this. We're gonna make a promise to anyone who's listening to this that there will be a follow-up, because I want to get into all that and unpack it. Because I think from a communication standpoint, it is really hard to then grow an intentional business if you've got a staff of people, at least some of which generationally or whatever number of reason are not able to communicate what it is that they actually want out of their career. It makes it really hard, darn near impossible, to actually extrapolate what it is, what it is that could actually be a really meaningful impact in your business by trying to build an intentional culture, by having people actually be a part of that process if they don't know what it is they want at the end of the day. And so I think part of our jobs as operators is almost like helping them to discover that. But, again, that takes time.
Amen. Amen to that. And let's end on a positive, optimistic note, which is we are still waiting for the answers from these individuals and from these teams. And it might be that we uncover a lot of value that we did not even know was possible. So it might not be a bad surprise. It might be positive.
Yeah.
We just have to uncover it.
So, Corrine, how do people get a hold of you and My Working Soul to dive in and start building an intentional culture within their organizations?
So you can visit us online at myworkingsoul.com. You can find me or the rest of the My Working Soul team on LinkedIn, and tune into the Higher Intelligence podcast. That's on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We would love to have your listenership.
Love it. You got mine. You got mine.
Yay.
Corrine, thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it. And we will talk very soon. Thank you guys for listening.